Well, storm warnings are being lifted along Florida's west coast after Hurricane Milton brought ferocious winds and a powerful storm surge. It made landfall as a Category 3 storm near Siesta Key, the second hurricane to hit the state in as many weeks. Ahead of making landfall, the weather system spawned more than a dozen tornadoes that left at least 2 dead and several people have been hospitalized. More than 2 million people are without power. The charity Feeding America says pop megastar Taylor Swift has donated $5 million to hurricane relief efforts. The storm is now tracking northeast over the Atlantic Ocean. Landon Aydlett is a meteorologist with the United States National Weather Service, and he joins me now. Landon, really good to have you on our program this evening. Now, Hurricane Milton did make landfall several hours ago in Tampa as a Category 3 storm. Give us a sense of how powerful and dangerous such a storm as a Category 3 system is in a fairly populated state.
Yeah, this is definitely a significant impact to the western coastline of Florida, right there on the Gulf Coast. It made landfall earlier this evening in Florida as a Category 3 hurricane. That's a maximum sustained winds of 120 miles per hour or 195 kilometers per hour. That's a significant hit to the metropolitan area of Tampa Bay. There's a little bit of good news that it made landfall just south of the heart of Tampa Bay, which has significant implications for that Tampa Bay area. With that storm surge, instead of building up into the city, it was drawn out of the bay because of that southern passage. That's a little bit of a good news for that area, but not so much for the areas down south, Sarasota and also Bradenton, Florida.
Yeah, of course, we are seeing pictures of significant damage, roofs, even of a stadium being blown off. Do you think it lived up to expectations that this was going to be one of the worst storms in a century, as was being forecast yesterday?
Yeah, that time will tell. And again, this is a very large metropolitan area, one that's not too accustomed to seeing major hurricanes make landfall. But Tropicana Stadium, that was unfortunate because that's where they had many responders and linemen taking shelter in that stadium complex to have that roof ripped off from the strong winds. But as daylight comes up for the next day, it's going to be revealing what's happening exactly in those areas of Florida.
Yeah, on that point of what is going to be revealed, do you expect there to be communities to be left isolated by these hurricanes' trail of destruction?
Absolutely. There's going to be many small towns, especially on the western Gulf Coast. And then moving on inland, there's going to be isolated for a while. This is similar to what they had just a couple of weeks ago with Hurricane Helene as it made landfall in the bend of the panhandle of Florida. The cleanup's going to be a long time. The good news is it hit at a Category 3, not as the superstorm Category 5, where it had that peak intensity of 180 miles per hour as it was passing north of the Yucatan Peninsula. That's a glimmer of good news with the system, but again, it's significant impacts. Flooding, storm surge, and a number of tornadoes have been making passages ahead of that storm.
Yeah, as you've mentioned right there, we've seen lots of vision of tornadoes forming around the state. How are they connected to this hurricane? How does a hurricane form multiple tornadoes?
Yeah, definitely. Tornadoes are not uncommon with hurricanes, especially in the outer rain bands. And ideally, they want to have that frictional difference with those outer rain bands, the instability from the daytime heating, the atmospheric moisture, but also the wind shear, which is most prevalent on the right front quadrant of a landfalling hurricane. Over the water is not so much a concern, but you can still get those spins, those vortices of wind through the column. But Milton has had quite a number of tornadoes, especially larger tornadoes. Usually they're very small and short-lived, but Milton has produced some pretty large tornadoes on the EF3, EF2 scale range.
Yeah, and tell us, Landon, how's the hurricane currently tracking at the moment and what's expected to happen in the coming hours?
Definitely the good news is Milton has made its way across south central Florida. It is making its departure over the eastern coast of near Cape Canaveral. That's where NASA is located, where they launch the space shuttles. It is making its departure from Florida into the Atlantic as a Category 1. Maximum sustained winds from the National Hurricane Center at the last advisory was at 85 miles per hour. That's about 135 kilometers per hour.
And of course, what about recovery? How long do you think this might take, given this double whammy of being hit by Hurricane Helene earlier.
Definitely, the governor of Florida is no stranger to responding to hurricanes in Florida. The state of Florida overall is very responsive and resilient to hurricanes following storms like Hurricane Michael and also Andrew in 1992. Significant hits. So they know how to batten down the hatches, evacuate properly, and then start picking up the pieces. Many people are staged across the state to come in into those hardest hit areas and start making repairs, setting up the infrastructure, the linemen, getting those power lines and communications back up and running. But as you mentioned, this is a two-front situation with Helene up the coast in the Panhandle. So it's going to take some time, especially where they had the Category 4 damage in the Panhandle just a couple of weeks ago.
And finally, Landon, there's been so much of disinformation ahead of the arrival of the hurricane. And there have been false claims such as it was engineered. How does it impact the work that meteorologists like yourself do?
Yeah, misinformation, old information that circles through the community, that always does have a hindering effect onto the mission we do. We were dealing with this in Guam just recently with some tropical weather threats in the Western North Pacific. But overall, it distracts people from the work that needs to be done. And so misinformation is just clutter when it comes to communication. So stay focused and listen to your official information sources, whether it's the weather or your emergency managers. That is the key to staying prepared and knowing exactly what to do to follow up after a system.
Okay, Landon Aydlett, keep up the good work. Thanks very much.